They often say that when one door closes, the other slams itself shut in your face. And this is sort of where we move into what's referred to as the classic Chris Chan era. This is an era in which something awful happens. And this run of events, which lasted for 4 years, in for anybody else would consider this one of the most humiliating and downright harshest parts of their lives. But through Chris's sheer obstinacy or refusal to learn, um, disasters happen one after another. And in such a short space of time, whatever reputation Chris might have had before this has been, well, alienated beyond belief. And that is long before we get into the more darker parts of his life. But let's cut to the chase. The classic era. So as I was saying, this covers 4 years from 2007 all the way up to 2010. You've wasted your life. You've wasted your life, and you think you're good enough to date anyone, including me. I mean, you're friggin' weak-willed. You're not even good enough for society. I don't think you're ever gonna get anything. You can't fight for what you want. I'm gonna be happy, and I'm gonna live my life, and you know what? You're gonna be doing the same thing in 5 years, if you're not dead. Context, Casey accurately predicting how stacked Chris's life would turn out to be after breaking up with him. And if it was anything like this is to go by, it probably wouldn't be any suggestion. Yes, I know this came out quite a bit before, but it has to be said, it's not a particularly good look. Which I could say that for everything else that happens in Chris' life, and don't worry, you won't have to see this for too much longer. Chris's rare talent, and by talent we mean pathology, was discovered when someone posted an anonymous picture of Sonichu on 4chan. It only took a quick Google search of Chris's name to discover the picture's author. He was also discovered on the 26th of October 2007 by the website Something Awful when a user derailed an unrelated conversation and wrote their personal account of Chris. A thread on Chris and Sonichu at large was created the very next day. Chris's miserable existence spilled over onto Encyclopedia Dramatica in November 2007. His life hasn't been the same ever since, and shockingly enough, Chris himself shoulders some of the blame for why that is. Despite the fact that people are trying to tell him about, how bad this looks, Chris will do usually what he always does, which is double down on these sorts of things, and it only gets worse from here, believe it or not. So upon learning of the Chris Chan article on ED, Chris released a single YouTube video attempting to diplomatically convince the site to remove the page. Failing at this, he then spent the next several months vandalizing the article in the vain hope of overwhelming his enemies. This catastrophically backfired on Chris. In an attempt to prove himself as lurid as the trolls, revealed a great deal of embarrassing information, most notably a portrait of himself blasting Megan Schroeder that ruined the most important relationship he probably ever had at the time, giving the trolls justification to continue their war against Chris in the process. By the spring of 2008, Chris would be banned from his most favorite hangout, temporarily, but he was then permanently banned in August of 2008. And his parents subsequently were also excused from his church for reasons at least partially related to information brought to light by the ED article. Whether this included Chris's racist rhetorics circa his attraction sign, it's probably a good guess, if not something even more insidious. Meantime, in August of 2008, Chris declared war upon Encyclopedia Dramatica in a series of videos threatening to withhold publication of the upcoming Sonichu issue 7, unless his vast, true, and loyal fanbase railed to force ED to remove the Chris Chan article. When ED suffered outages unrelated to this crusade, Chris took credit and declared victory. However, this inevitably did not last long, because ironically guaranteeing that he would be under constant fire from trolls for years to come. This began an endless cycle in which Chris would produce videos, comics, and harebrained schemes to attack the trolls, which would in turn encourage more and more trolls to provoke him for his hilarious responses, where he would reveal more information about himself. And the cycle continues over and over again, and Chris did not take the slightest hint at all this. For example, you see this image right here? This would not have come out into existence whatsoever if a troll did not ask Chris to make it. And for reasons that will make sense when we get to certain articles later down the year, back in the day, all you had to do was be under the disguise of a woman interested in dating Chris, and Chris would have done anything if you asked him to. And we mean anything. But more on that later. The cycle was briefly disrupted in the fall of 2008 when Chris sent his various medallions to his fake internet girlfriend, who immediately destroyed them and broke up with him. This emotional heartbreak and the release of Little Big Planet reduced Chris's output of videos and other sources of lols. At the same time, Encyclopedia Dramatica began cracking down on trolls using Chris's ED page as a forum for discussing him. And in general, opinion was divided as to whether it was funny or an obnoxious and tiring thing to continue harassing him. The resulting schism led to the creation of numerous websites, such as this one singularly devoted to documenting his entire life, which has only expanded the coverage of Chris's hijinks. By late 2008, trolls controlled many aspects of Chris's life by posing as dedicated fans, sweethearts, cartoonish enemies, and prospective business partners. Chris's ego and naivete readily embraced this brave new world in which every woman wanted to date him, so to speak. Every man was either trying to help him sell Sonotube products or steal the franchise for their own nefarious goals, and that any and all trolls were a vocal minority on his way to fame and fortune. Trolls, therefore, would begin denoting major events in Chris's life known as sagas, such as the Miyamoto saga, the Julie saga, the Ivy saga, the Liquid saga, and the Aspachu saga. All the while, the editors and administrators working at Encyclopedia Dramatica and the Quickie maintained constant record of these events, ensuring that Chris could not get away from his highly selective and revisionary treatment of his history. Following his disastrous failure to woo a real girl in March 2010, Chris began to realize what anyone else would have figured out a long time ago, that his internet presence and the toxic cycle of exposing himself for and getting exploited or otherwise made fun of by trolls and reacting poorly to said trolling was having a detrimental effect upon his mental health and social life. For context, I think I can actually sort of point to the exact moment when this sort of happened. It was round about February 25th, 2010, when Chris was having his final phone conversation with Alec Benson Leary, and pretty much at the very end of the phone call, Alec did ask Chris, well, why do you keep responding to trolls then? And he went on to explain that Chris had a very what was it? He had a very had a very broad definition of trolls, and that Chris felt that there's so many different people were trolls because they told Chris things he didn't want to hear and things that literally did not affect Chris, but he felt he was vindicated to voice an opinion full of vitriol and scorn. Now, considering how dense Chris's skull appears to be, it would be argued one way or another that Chris doesn't really take these sorts of things on board. But what would get Chris to start paying attention is that, well, after all this time, something had to go click inside his brain. And that being that whatever was going on at the moment, it wasn't working. And it did cause Chris to slightly pull back. It did take a little bit of a while before Chris decided to really go in a different direction and talk about things less, but either way, he didn't really 100% stop doing it. And as a result, different sort of trolls with different schemes came on the scene. more as a response to some of the things that Chris did. But that's also going to be, we'll have to discuss this in greater detail when it comes to the actual psychology as to the various sorts of people who wanted to troll Chris over the years. You're starting to notice that it's actually a little bit more complicated than just guy who couldn't draw Pikachu for an art class. With every new video that he created exasperating the problem. This realization appears to have led him to reduce his online presence and to stop donning solitary medallions and clown shirts. For a time, it looked like Chris was learning from his experiences and was making an effort to improve his own life a lot. But in November 2010, around the same time another romantic saga involving another sweetheart had ended in failure, Chris announced he will no longer socialize online or publish videos of himself. Subsequently, all videos save for the last one were removed from his YouTube channel, and it initially appeared that Chris was making a positive lifestyle change. But alas, it was quickly discovered that his internet activity had not completely ceased since he announced retirement from social media, instead of investing his time into more productive activities or improving on his social skills. Chris instead spent much more time playing video games and otherwise doing what he had been doing when he was not engaging with the trolls. In a predictable fashion, he ultimately forgot anything that he might have learned from his experiences of being one of the internet's biggest punching bags, and he subsequently returned to making new videos starting in August of 2011, albeit with a pretty big change in how he presented himself online. But as we'll get to explaining next time, and things that you've probably also caught on even at this early stage, is that Chris can say he's a new person, or that he's changed his identity, or that he no longer thinks of gay men as people who should immediately go to hell. Instead, Chris merely, some have argued all Chris did is he returned to the internet with a new coat of paint. And unfortunately, a new coat of paint doesn't absolutely wash away the sins of his past, or even restructure the way he approaches people in the real world and in the online world. And there can be no doubt that this attitude literally became exasperated and would become even more problematic for years to come. And see, that's the thing that the classic era does sort of illustrate, is that Chris is still Chris. Maybe not on the outside, but on the inside. And if anything, because of what we have seen already, his behavior becomes even more derailed. But that's sort of more where we pick up from next time, because these are just the most important details to know as we go to explain the more nitty-gritty details. So with that being said, I'll see all of you guys again next time. Thank you.